Debbie asked me to introduce everybody tonight and welcome everybody that came. I'm glad to see the crowd. Our hostess tonight is Diana and Larry Brunkow, and
me.
Donn Teske is going to be the narrator, and Barb will Joan will probably have a lot to say too. She's done a lot of record keeping on the cemetery for years, and we have Deanna filming for us, and Debbie said that she was going to be watching from home. Okay, Donn, you're at it.
No, Larry and Diane are the hosts here. I'm just going to add color.
I'm gonna hide it. Here, you can go that way. You don't have to die. You don't have to be blind, hopefully.
Okay.
Oh, well, anyway.
Well, I just want to welcome everybody here, and I'm going to give a brief introduction, a little history of the cemetery and the church. The cemetery, I don't know the exact date it was really organized, but the 7 charter members in 1875 for the church, and there's 7 of them buried here, starting down that way at Knipp, where the little flags are, Knipp, and there's a Coderman here, but by his wife's stone, it says unmarked. We assume he's in there, but there's no stone marker for him. And then there's F. Hartwick right here, stones on each side, Ferdinand Hartwick, and on over William F. Brunkow, a great uncle. And on down the road there's a Frederick Kufall, and beside him's J.W. Brunkow, a great grandfather. J.F.
There were 9.
Yeah, there's 2 of them not buried here. I'm not sure where they're buried.
Wilhelm Coderman
F.W. Wagner and Michael Hartwick. They're not buried here.
Wilhelm Coderman was a charter member, and he's...
W.F. Coderman. His wife's right there, and we can't find any place.
That's the wrong Coderman. It was W.F. over here. There were 5 W.F. Codermans.
Yeah, I know. But this one matches the date of his wife, Hannah Louise.
Brunkow.
Yeah.
And where's he buried?
Right there.
Well, there's no stone.
And you look in the book, and that's her husband. Anyway, that's a mystery. Somebody can sort it out.
Who did he say he married? A Hartwick? No, he married a Brunkow.
A Brunkow.
Yeah, a Brunkow's who he married.
Right.
A little history on the stones here. This first row is predominantly all babies and real young kids until the very south end. There's a lot of tragedy and death in these early years, and you'll find it scattered out over the whole cemetery, really. One of the early barriers was August Kufall in 1870. It's the first one I could find. I think he's over in that area. And just there's a flag. You see J.F. Brunkow to the south of him. There's a John Gertler, and as far as we know, he was in the Civil War, served under Grant and Sherman. And that came out of the Omega history book records. He settled northeast of Duluth, Section 8 at one time. And to the east of him, I don't know if it's marked, I think it's on Southfield, a tall white stone. It's a Carol Honstead. She was 20 years old and she died having a baby. So they're both buried right there. That's one of the earlier ones to be buried here. Died at childbirth, 20 years old. And there's 2 or 3 more in here that early 20s that died in childbirth, and a lot of babies. So
Larry was telling about this first row being mostly young children. The stone over there beside the white car is a Martin boy, and that was the son of Gottfried and Minnie Martin. And that was their first child, and so he would have been born in a log cabin across the road from where Chad Evans lives now. And he was 2 years old, and he pulled a pot of scalding coffee off over on himself and scalded himself to death. So they had a whole series of girls after that, and after every girl, Gottfried would say, well, I had a son once, and always blamed his wife for that death. So when Frank Martin come along, he was spoiled. Sorry, Larry.
That's okay. You're enlightening me.
I heard there was a little kid that died of a snake bite. Was that here? I don't know.
Where'd you find that at?
I read something about
I don't know.
Wagner. I think what I read.
Okay.
Around the Wagner's homestead, the first Wagner moved in there, had a little girl that got bit by a rattlesnake and died.
She's not here.
No, he's not buried here.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. I didn't know the story.
And the first burial here, as far as I could find, that was August Kufal in 1870. He was 3 years old.
3 years old.
And in 1857, August Colderman was born here, and he was the first white boy to be born in Mill Creek Township, August Colderman. It must have just been all Indians predominantly. And one of the
Say that again, Larry, would you? I'm sorry.
August Colderman, born in 1857, first white boy born in Mill Creek Township.
Well, that's cool.
It's in your history book.
That day would be about right.
I've read that.
And one of the, not the oldest person here, but the lady that was born the earliest of anybody we could find was Marie Wagner. It's a small, fairly new flat stone down over here.
It's over
She
that.
was born in 1806. That's as far back as could find anybody. Then there's several of them, 1817, 1818, 1819 right in here. Then in the war, of course, we said the Civil War veteran over there, John Gertler, as far as we know, is the only one in here. And then there's more, I don't know how many, it's a handful of World War I veterans, and there's one right across behind here. Fred Martin was the first one, or the only one that was killed in World War I.
For this congregation.
Yeah, in this congregation, yeah,
In this cemetery.
in this cemetery. And there's more. I didn't research all that to find out who's the veteran stuff, but there's a lot of World War II and some Korean War veterans and some Vietnam.
I got a story about Fred if you want to hear it.
There we go.
I'm sorry. So that would have been the Martin over by the railroad tracks. Was that John Martin?
John Gottlieb.
Gottlieb. Yeah,
Gottlieb.
Gottlieb.
And,
Yep.
and Pauline was the sister.
She'll correct me. but anyhow, that was Gottfried's brother's family, and he was killed in World War I and sent back. And Grandma always said that when they brought it back, that the parents wouldn't let it be buried in our cemetery until they were sure it was him. And the people that delivered the body said, no, that casket's permanently sealed, you can't open it. And she said, Gottfried, he was chunky like me and liked to be in Horseshoe Street when he got drunk. He said he walked over to her with one hand and threw the lid off, and they figured out it was actually him before they would let him be buried in here.
Okay.
I'm sorry. That was Grandma's story.
Well, I don't have too much to say, just my relatives, J.F. was a great-great-grandparent, and his wife's buried down there. And after that, my great-grandfather, I don't know what happened. There was a rift they had with the Lutheran Church, and they split off. And so my great-grandparents, parents, all buried in Onega. And then somehow along I discovered this little Lutheran gal over here, and she hooked me, and now I'm back in the Lutherans. So people ask me, how come I don't have more immediate family over here? But then I do have a grandson down there, a 10-year-old Dawson Brunkow that died, had an accident and complications. So that about does it for me. You can take over.
You're on, Donn.
You got stories? I know you probably got some about.
Yeah, a whole bunch over there.
Yeah, a lot of cases.
I was always told that when they formed the church in 1875 and and started the cemetery, that the burials before that were all on the Indian mound over the hill to the north, in the bottom. And that when they started this church, then they relocated those burials to this cemetery. Story has it that one of the burials there was a traveling Lutheran pastor that died of cholera here. Cholera. And that he's buried on there. Well, when we farmed that bottom, there was still a stone there, and that would have been William F. Colderman's nephew, the Zabel boy. And we always farmed around that all those years, but then the descendants of that family relocated that stone over to Home Cemetery, so the stone is actually at Home Cemetery. But I think there's probably some truth in the fact that, or the story that the bodies were relocated because when we was farming around there, you would find granite coffin ornaments, like what would be nailed onto a wood coffin, and they, you'd find them there on that mound and on the ground around that. So I suspect there was some bodies relocated, and so I would also suspect there's quite a few unmarked graves here along with that story.
Yeah, looking through the books over there's a lot of plots that says unmarked. And some of them are married together. I mean, like a mother and a newborn baby that buried in the same grave.
In the east end over here, they went to bury a person and hit a coffin. So, so they basically haven't buried anybody more over in that area. We've heard there was a lot of babies that got buried there that nobody really knew about either. So.
What just flittered through my mind, which is a worthless story that has nothing to do with the cemetery, but I visited Daniel Boone's grave and his wife once in eastern Missouri, and it's just, 10 stones in a cemetery type thing, but and I was visiting with the curator at the Daniel Boone National Park there, and he was telling that there was a big lawsuit, and that Kentucky wanted Daniel Boone and his wife back to Kentucky, and they won a lawsuit. But he says what we didn't tell him in Missouri was that when they went to bury Daniel Boone, they got down there and there was already a coffin there, and so they buried him horizontally at the base of the graves. And so then, as this got into the courts again, they checked out the DNA on the bones, and the wife fit, but the husband was a 6'5" black man. and Daniel Boone was a little short fella, so he says, "We still got Daniel." Has nothing to do with this. So we could walk around, and I'm happy to do that, but you get into a lot of the Teske family down here. The one grave up here that's heart-shaped, I think, is really significant, because that's the grave of the family that got taken by the tornado in 1915, and so that was the Burgesses right here, the heart-shaped stone.
5 of them got killed.
And an infant, so yeah.
Yeah, Roy and Arlo were the only two that survived.
Right, and I've got sent some Roy pictures for Monday night, so.
How did Roy survive?
He was, I think he went out to get the cows or something, I think.
They were injured, I think.
Yeah. But anyhow, I read a story about that, and they said the only way they could get the bodies into the mortuary was on the railroad tracks, that everything else was underwater from that storm. It was so violent. And that was the same storm that took out the railroad down to, well, the kind of railroad down to Westmoreland. So, they had taken that train, quote, onto the bridge over Rock Creek to try and hold a bridge, and it took it and drowned a bunch of guys that were on the train, and that was the same.
That was
storm.
1950?
Yeah, same
That's
storm.
where John Coker lives now, where that tornado hit. That's where
You
the
probably heard
Burgess
too,
live.
Donn, about the Burgess back in the, what the year was, in the 40s or sometimes, when kids were playing down in that area and found this golden wedding ring, and it was Emma, it was the mother's wedding ring.
Wow.
Yeah. I've heard
Wow.
that. That's in one of the histories.
Yeah, it's in Onega history.
Yeah.
And so the grave with the border, cement border around it, that's Guthrie, Minnie, that's my great grandparents.
Mine too.
Yeah, and a whole bunch of others. Yep.
Yeah.
But then the grave,
Scott Brunkow.
and that would have been the parents of this Martin boy that got scalded to death. And so, but the one beside is that Sophie, Lisa, Sophia.
Yeah.
She had broken, a ruptured appendix.
Appendicitis.
She had a ruptured appendix, and the doctor cut her appendix out on the kitchen table. There where Marvin lived. And she got peritonitis and didn't survive.
They took her to Topeka, and she died of infection in Topeka.
Yeah.
There's another family buried that the gravestone, the tallest one in that third row from here on the end. That's Betty Smith, which would have been Elmer and Sylvia Ackley's daughter. And they're all cremated, so they're in one lot.
Elmer and Sylvia are down here, and so most of us are old enough to remember the Tidy Bite and the Golden Knight, so that was Elmer and Sylvia.
One thing I might add, just going through all the notes and papers, all the people that are buried here, there's just statistics, there's actual buried here that I could find out on these records. There's 37 Broncos, 37 Codermans, 27 Teskes, 24 Kufalls, 18 Wagners, 17 Honings and Martins, 16 Keels, 14 Burgess, then on down there's a lot, 6, 8, 10 Hetzlers and Buchholz are some of the earlier ones too.
Teske didn't even count? Boy.
27 of them.
Oh, okay, I missed that.
Yep. So, and then from there they all spread out. They just kept repopulating.
Yeah. There was some, back when they were doing that documentary, the cameraman was from Berlin. And he got to walking around here and he got to telling me what family names meant. And he said like Honig's meant happy and Keels meant sour.
We could use him to read some of the inscriptions on a lot of these.
Yeah, you got that right. Yeah.
I don't know what they are.
Yeah.
Some of them you kind of guess. But.
So kind of along that way, back in the 80s, I hosted a German dairy farmer. And I got him together with Grandma, and she was so excited because whenever I go in the house over there, she just switched to German with her sisters, and they'd keep on talking. And so she had this German guy to talk to, and she just sat there and yapped away at him forever. And afterwards, I asked him, I said, so, could you understand her okay and whatever? And he said it was really, really hard to understand her. He says, it's like you would have taken a snapshot of 150 years ago, and the language has evolved so much. He says it was really hard to understand her. And then there was High German and Low German.
Yeah.
And I always thought that had to do with social class, but it actually had to do where they came from in Germany, the lowlands of Germany.
We found a letter over at Raymond's house from his parents, Raymond Fisher. When he was stationed in Germany, we found some of their letters that went back and forth, and his mom and dad were saying to him, we are so sorry we didn't teach you the language. We were teaching you to speak American when we should have been doing both. So that was kind of cool to find.
That would be. Yeah, and like Dad never learned to speak English until like 2nd or 3rd grade, but he never knew a word of German when I...
Well, I learned something about the schools here. The one that's a house there, west of the church, just north of Larry and Diane's. That replaced the Colderman School, which was up on Charlie L, just west of Scott and Sherry's driveway. The foundation's still there. It went to New Chatel, which is now the hall up there. And then this school was built. But I've got a picture of it with Dad's 2 oldest brothers in it. And I finally said to Larry Honey one day, why? I said, I know, Grandma, said all those kids came out of the Duluth school in the 8th grade. And he said, back then, you had to go to a public school for 2 years, or else they wouldn't count you as graduating from a parochial school. So
I might add on that,
changed
that school north of us, my mom taught there her first years out of teachers training for 2 years, I think. She said the 8th grade boys were bigger than she was. Some of them a little older than.
Have you ever
should've been.
seen the graduation test for an 8th grader back then? It was harder than a high school test, actually, mathematically.
Yeah, you could teach right out of school, clear up into the 30s.
It was actually, they learned more in the first 8th grades than they did graduating from high school.
They didn't have sports.
Well, and now we've got a lot more history.
Exactly.
Yeah, she taught up there in 37 and a couple of years, and she taught over northeast of Onega where Forgies lived in that area a couple of years.
You know, one other one I often reflect on is like Stanley Colderman over here. He was the age of a lot of you. I mean, there's a casualty of the Vietnam War that wasn't a casualty of the Vietnam War.
Yeah, he should.
How many of them are out there like that?
Yes.
Yep, that's for sure.
Well, I really don't have anything more to add. If people want to walk around, look, and ask questions, maybe we can help them out.
Yeah, William F. Colderman's buried up here.
Which one?
Yeah,
which
the
one?
one that donated the land for the church and the woodlots.
Well, and did
Well, the present day church.
Yeah.
The first church was across the road.
Yeah, I know, you told me
that.
It's my understanding that the land that the cemetery is on was donated by my grandpa, Robert Brunkow.
Right.
Because this was part of his farm.
He owned that right over here.
Yeah, that they lost during the Depression.
But then Emil Colderman's buried right over here, and he's the son that we bought the Colderman place from in '55.
Early map I saw looked like maybe it was divided kind of down the middle. Section line maybe,
Yep.
and the Broncos this and Colderman was on that side.
Probably the,
Yeah, you can see the post down here.
Yeah, and the post line looks like Marvin Abbott is on the west side of the lane. That's the boundary line. Marvin won't let us move those. You know, it comes by the flowers.
oh, you mean here in the cemetery?
Yeah. Well, it's
Actually,
it's on the north side of the cemetery. It's really not the cemetery property. It's still Marvin Abbott's.
Okay.
Yeah, that's his all over.
Done a lot of improvements to this place.
It's a beautiful cemetery.
It's quiet in here. You don't, except when the trains go by.
You know, got one of our friends that comes down deer hunting, his brother-in-law, his name is Buchholz, but they pronounce it Buckles. And so I when I had seen their name, I said, oh, he's a Buchholz. And they went, what? And I said, Buchholz.
Yeah.
And so Josh took a picture of the tombstone here that says Buchholz on it. So we had this long discussion about how that was supposed to be pronounced. Well, I don't know what it would be in Germany. Wag wouldn't be Wag in Germany either. It's Wege. So
I know there was, back in the old days, there were several Buchholz and Broncos married, and Hetzlers and Broncos. There was like 2 Hetzler brothers married 2 Bronco sisters. I don't remember the names.
Johann was married to 2 different women. His first wife died.
Yeah.
The one he married second, Sophie Zabel, was a cousin to John Zabel. Okay. And see, those John Zabel and some of those families are buried in home cemetery. So some of that, you know, it's.
And that stone house there was John Zabel. That stone house there was John Zabel.
Yes, because his name is up over the door. They had lived in a couple of different buildings before that. And they just moved to it. They built a little bit bigger one, and they moved into that one and turned that one into a shed. And then they finally did the the big
But
one.
John was a son-in-law of William no, he was a brother-in-law of William F. Colden and a son-in-law of
Yes.
Candace.
Because he was married to a Coleman.
Yep.
Sophie's a sister to Wilhelmina Abbott's and Caroline Brunkow.
Sophie who? Colden?
Sophie Zabel that married her.
Yes.
She's a sister to Minnie Abbott's and Caroline Brunkow, right? The two Zabel sisters.
That I cannot share.
I won't argue with you.
But the Zabel.
Were they Zabels then?
The Zabels.
Okay.
I can remember
But how
my close relatives.
they were cousins
You
of
gotta
John.
realize
Yes,
that was the
yes.
lady last week, so my
Cousins,
memory's
not
shot.
not directly related to John.
Well,
No.
but cousins.
Cousins, yes, yes,
Which
yes. The Zabel,
was a
the
Zabel
Zabel,
too.
yeah.
Diane's got a book here that was made 25 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And it's of the descendants of the 9 original charter members. And they will
Which like Jeff
A lot
Schwartz,
of them.
Yeah.
You haven't seen
and Alan
the
are
genealogy of the
cousins
9
to
charter members.
Gail and Carol 3 different ways.
That thick.